Did you ever listen to words that you've maybe heard 100 times, 1,000 times, and actually pay attention to the words that you learn by heart and catch yourself and go, wait, what? I'm thinking about times like you listen to the words of that well-known, universally known American lullaby, rockabye baby, in the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle, and all. Yikes, we're singing a song to children about the baby falling out of the tree without any question about why is the baby up in the tree in the first place in a cradle. Or children learn Ring Around the Rosie like from toddlerhood and play the little game going around in circles. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down, without realizing at all that's a song about the plague and about people dying from the plague. It's so strange how there are these life and death heavy words and messages, but because they're so familiar, because we're used to them, it's like we don't even pay attention anymore to what words are coming out of our mouths. It's easy for that to happen. Sometimes they say familiarity breeds contempt, but I think sometimes familiarity breeds indifference, numbness. We don't even realize what things we are saying anymore. And I think that's especially true for us Christians, for us church folk, when it comes to the language of this, the cross. We are so quick to instantly turn the cross into our logo, like the church is a business or a corporation and that this is our corporate brand, rather than to see this as the instrument of torture and dominance from the empire that it surely meant when Jesus first used the language of taking up the cross and following him. We're going to hear this coming Sunday, one more of those places where Jesus uses that imagery from the end of chapter 10 of Matthew, after having talked about the division that Jesus' presence is going to bring in the world, and Jesus' commission to his disciples to announce out loud to the wide world what he's told to them. And then he comes and says this at the end of chapter 10. Jesus says, "Whoever loves father or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." Those words about taking up the cross and following Jesus are ones that church folk, Christians, have been reciting for so long. I almost wonder if it's another case of Ring Around the Rosie or Rockabye Baby, that there are these life and death words being spoken, and we so glibly sort of pass them by, or we turn that language of taking up a cross into whatever personal hardship I don't happen to like at the moment. I've got extra yard to mow because we got extra rain. I've got to mow the grass more this week. It's just my cross I have to bear. Or I had to wait extra long in traffic. That's my cross I have to bear. We sometimes turn our personal grievances or inconveniences and talk about them like the cross we have to bear, or just the general suffering that is a part of life as the cross we have to bear. And that's not really what Jesus has in mind. In Jesus' life and time, cross signifies something awfully specific and powerful. Only one force in the world crucifies people. That's the government, that's the empire. And Jesus envisions that his movement is going to be seen as a threat to the empire. And in fact, in those early centuries, the empire did see us Christians as a threat, not because any Christians were raising up an army or starting a militia to take back the empire for God, but because they refused to acknowledge that the empire ruled in any way that really mattered after all. They insisted on saying Jesus is Lord, and therefore Caesar was not Lord. And every time the empire insisted that you bring a little incense in Caesar's honor or confessed your allegiance to the empire and all that it stood for, followers of Jesus wouldn't, and in fact instead would announce God's kingdom, God's reign, and that Jesus was Lord. That kind of defiance, that kind of resistance is what got us in trouble in those first several centuries of Christian history. So when Jesus talks about taking up a cross and following him, he's saying this, of course, before he is crucified. People in the first century don't hear that as, oh, Jesus is talking about whatever personal inconvenience I don't like. It's about a particular witness. It's about announcing to the world and saying to the world that God's reign is not Caesar's reign. In the end, empires that come and go will all crumble and won't last, but that we point to something different, that we belong to a different order, a different way of living in the world, that God's reign can happen right here, even under the nose of the empire, even under the nose of Caesar, right in the midst of the powers of the day, who are still going to spend their time and energy clamoring for more wealth and more power and more status. And here, we, the followers of Jesus, will announce God's reign in subversive, small, little ways under the radar. Every time we practice kindness rather than violence and vengeance, we're pointing to a different reign. Every time we take some of our abundance and share it with a neighbor, we're dethroning the power of wealth from becoming a god or Caesar in our own lives. Any time we say no to the order of the day that seems bent on violence and domination and one country invading another or blowing up another, every time we say no, that's not the way God does things, that's not the reign of God, we're pointing to a different reality. And sometimes that will upset people. You might know that these days going on in Ukraine, there is quite an amount of resistance, even to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, coming from Russians and from Russian Christians, some of whom are saying we shouldn't be invading another country. That's not right. That's not the reign of God. And there are other respectable religious voices in that community saying, no, it's wrong to speak out against the war. No, it's wrong. It's a sin to say we shouldn't be invading another country. And there have been religious leaders who've been jailed or persecuted, even brought up on charges of heresy for saying it was wrong to invade another country. Our history is littered with examples of people who needed to speak up and to say no to the powers of the day and who embodied a different way of life. From Dr. King in the civil rights movement to leaders in the resistance against the Nazis like Dietrich Bonhoeffer in World War II. Right in our own moment, there are times where we are called as the followers of Jesus to speak a no to the violence and domination of the world, and instead to say yes to the way that God's reign operates. We've been seeing and listening in recent weeks to glimpses of what God's reign looks like. It's evil spirits that are cast out. It's sickness that's healed. It's leprosy that's cleansed. It's the dead who are raised. It's welcome to the outcast. Jesus is convinced that's what God's reign looks like. And when that runs up against the powers of the day that think they call the shots, they will get upset when we announce they don't have all the cards. They'll get upset when we announce that Jesus is Lord and not Caesar or any empire of any time or any place. When we hear Jesus say that following him will mean being willing to take up our cross and follow him, it's not just about bearing the petty little inconveniences of the day. Oh, I had to talk to somebody I don't get along with, or I had to listen to somebody who was boring today, or I had to sit in a long meeting. These are not our cross. That's life. That's part of life, is just sometimes we do things we don't like. That's a conversation for another day. But when Jesus talks about taking up the cross, it's with that awareness that announcing God's reign is sometimes going to make us unpopular, because there are an awful lot of voices, especially voices of empire, past and present and future, that want to insist that they call the shots, that they will reign and rule forever, and their ways of getting things done are all that matters. And we're going to continue to be this very different presence under the radar, feeding our neighbors and welcoming strangers and practicing love for our enemies and teaching kindness and compassion, because we've seen that in Jesus, even when that upsets the powers of the day. That's what it looks like. That's what it means to take up our cross and follow Jesus. And as difficult as that is, we also come to discover, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote, God's grace is costly because it costs us our lives, but it is grace because it gives us the only life there really is. Join us this coming Sunday for that conversation about stepping into the life that really is life. See See you Sunday.